I laughed at a video clip I saw recently on social media. A young woman was pretending to give her horse a manicure. The horse had its hoof resting patiently in her lap while she used a farrier's tool as a nail file. As she worked, she slipped into the familiar pattern of a nail salon conversation. Do you have a boyfriend? Oh, why not? You're so pretty. You could be a cheerleader or a model. And then she asked the only relevant question, do you want short or long nails? The horse, voiced off camera, replied, short nails. And the manicurist answered without missing a beat, oh, honey, that's why you don't have a boyfriend. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to pause. Notice what is happening in your body right now. Did anything tighten? Did your breathing change? Did you feel amused, uneasy, defensive, curious? You don't need to share, just notice. Because when I first saw that video, I laughed. Part of me laughed because the scene was absurd. A horse, a manicure, the performance of a familiar script in the most unlikely of settings. Part of me laughed because the woman had perfectly captured a type of conversation I've endured in one form or another for decades while just trying to get a haircut. Conversations centered on attracting and keeping a man, on looking younger, on shoes that didn't allow you to run, on what makes a woman valuable in the eyes of someone else. Conversations where I often felt I had nothing to contribute, while being my authentic self didn't feel welcome or even safe. Where, when I was younger, fitting in felt necessary for survival, laughing along before I knew I could choose otherwise. But mostly, if I'm honest, I laughed because at the time, I found it pretty funny. And then, almost immediately, the laughter caught in my throat. Because suddenly, I saw more clearly what the humor was built on. This wasn't just silliness, it was disparagement humor. Humor that works by aiming at someone, by leaning on old scripts of who is desirable, who is lacking, and who gets to be the punchline. And the part that unsettled me the most was not that the joke existed. It was that I had laughed anyway, not nervously or reluctantly, or because I wanted to belong, or because I felt unsafe. It was that, even though I was the target of the joke, I had really laughed. That moment stayed with me as a strange kind of gift, because it showed me something about myself that I needed to see. It gave me a mirror I hadn't asked for. It invited a question I couldn't shake. What does my laughter make easier for me to overlook? And what does it make harder for me to see? As I think back to that horse, sitting so patiently with its foreleg resting in the woman's lap, I realized that what first made me laugh and then made me cringe now makes me pause. And this is where I want to stay with you for a while today, not in judgment, but in that pause, that small, tender, powerful space between reaction and response, between what our bodies do automatically and what our spirits, with practice, may learn to choose. Moments like that video rarely happen in isolation. We don't meet them as blank slates. We meet them carrying lifetimes of learning about what keeps us safe, what helps us belong, what earns approval, and what risks rejection. Many of us were formed in environments where laughter was a kind of social passport, where laughing along meant you were easy to be with, where not laughing could mark you as difficult, humorless, or out of step. In those spaces, families, workplaces, classrooms, congregations, friend groups, reacting quickly was often rewarded. Pausing, especially when something fell off, could feel risky. For some of us, laughter became a way to survive discomfort. For others, a way to avoid conflict. For many, a way to signal that we belonged. And belonging matters. It matters spiritually. It matters in our bones. We're wired for it. which means that long before we ever choose our values with intention, many of us were already being formed by our reactions, by what we laughed at, by what we shared, by what we let pass without comment, by what we learned not to question too closely. And then at some point, many of us found our way into Unitarian Universalism, often because we care deeply, because we want to live with integrity, because we believe in justice, in dignity, in the worth of every person, because we long for communities where we can be more fully ourselves, but our old formation doesn't disappear just because our values deepen. Sometimes we find ourselves caught between two real impulses. The first is moral immediacy, the urge to react quickly when something feels wrong, to name it right away, to respond with clarity and conviction. The second is spiritual discernment, the slower work of noticing what is happening in us before we decide how to respond. Our culture tends to reward the first, but spiritual formation usually happens in the second. And this is true not only for us as individuals, but as part of our spiritual life. We are a community that cares deeply, and with that care comes a kind of momentum, where energy, thoughts, and words can begin to move a little more quickly in the moments that matter. And still, even in those moments, the spiritual invitation remains the same. Can we slow ourselves just enough to choose our response instead of defaulting to our reflex? The moment with that video didn't just show me something about my laughter. It showed me something about formation itself, about how quickly the body moves before the spirit has time to weigh in, about how easily reaction outruns reflection. And it raised a larger question for me. What are we practicing over and over again in the way we react? And who are we becoming as a result? It turns out that laughter is not just a reaction, it's also a teacher. When we laugh, our brains release feel-good chemicals, dopamine and endorphins. Most of the time, that's a gift. Laughter builds trust, laughter strengthens bonds, laughter reminds us that we are not alone. But our brain has one important blind spot. It doesn't ask why we are laughing. It doesn't distinguish between humor that lifts people up and humor that pushes people down. It simply rewards that laughter and quietly says, do that again. But this also means that whatever ideas were attached to that laughter, whether compassionate or harmful, get reinforced. Over time, this repetition matters. Each laugh deepens a neural pathway. Each shared joke strengthens an association. And when laughter happens in a group, something even more powerful joins the mix, the chemistry of belonging, oxytocin. We laugh together, we feel pleasure, we feel connection, and the ideas carried by that laughter begin to feel normal. This doesn't mean people consciously intend harm. It doesn't mean they want to dehumanize anyone. It means the body learns faster than the conscience. It's just a joke, can slide past our moral awareness. Discomfort gets overridden by connection, and laughter starts to quiet that part of us that might otherwise pause and ask, what is this shaping in me? And that brings us to the quiet spiritual question beneath all of this. What is forming us when we are not paying attention? Motivational speaker and author Wayne Dyer once offered a simple image. He said that when you squeeze an orange, you're never going to get grape juice. Orange juice comes out because that's what's inside. The squeeze doesn't create the juice, it reveals it. Or as Anonymous Hamster would say, what's in our cups is what spills out. Life squeezes us all the time, through stress and fear, through exhaustion or conflict, through uncertainty, through difference. And something always comes out, not because we choose it in that instant, but because it is what has already been practiced within us. Humor can be one of these squeezes. When that video squeezed me, what came out was laughter. Not because I was a heartless person, not because I endorsed the message beneath the joke, but because my nervous system, like every nervous system, has been shaped by years of repetition, long before my values were fully formed. This is not a sermon about shame. It's a sermon about responsibility. Because if the squeeze reveals what is inside us, then the spiritual work is not only about managing what comes out in the moment. The deeper work is tending what is growing within us all the time. This is where spiritual formation lives. In Unitarian Universalism, we often speak about right relationship, our relationship with one another, with the wider world, with all that is sacred. But right relationship is not something we achieve once and for all. It is something we practice in 1,000 small moments of attention. It's practice when we notice what our bodies are doing before our words arrive. It is practice when we feel the tug of quick reaction and choose to breathe instead. It is practice when we resist the urge to share something simply because it is clever or provocative, and ask whether it is also kind or necessary. Justice, too, is not only something we advocate for in the public square. It is something that shapes how our reflexes are trained. Over time, justice teaches us to feel what we once overlooked, to pause where we once rushed, to listen where we once assumed. And discernment, the ability to choose response instead of reaction, is one of the most quietly powerful spiritual skills we can learn. Discernment slows us just enough to ask, what is being invited here? What is being reinforced? What kind of world is this moment training me to accept? Reactivity is fast. Discernment is slower. And discernment can be learned. Each time we pause before reacting, we widen the space between impulse and action. Each time we choose not to respond automatically, we strengthen a different muscle. Each time we let discomfort be information, we reshape our inner landscape. Spiritual formation is happening whether we intend it or not. The question is not whether we are being formed. The question is who and what we are allowing to form us. And the good news is this: formation is never finished. Even the reflexes we learned for survival can soften. Even the habits that once kept us safe can be reshaped. Not overnight and not without missteps, but over time, with attention. That moment with the video did not turn my life upside down. What it offered instead was quieter than that. It offered me a question I am still living with, because I am not someone who has mastered reactivity. I am someone who knows it all too well. Like many of us, I still speak too quickly sometimes. I still react before I reflect. I still feel the surge of certainty, that spark of irritation, that quick flash of judgment, before I've had time to ask whether it carries my deeper values with it. This sermon is not the story of having arrived. It is the story of noticing and of practicing. What feels different now is not that reactivity has disappeared. It's that I am more aware of it when it shows up. Sometimes the pause comes, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I remember to breathe. Sometimes I remember only afterward. And even that uneven remembering feels like part of the work. I am learning slowly that spiritual growth is not a straight line from insight to perfection. It is more like a returning to intention, a returning to awareness, a returning to the question, how do I want to show up here? And for me, that is deeply Unitarian Universalist. We are not a people who claim moral purity. We are a people who covenant to keep practicing together. We promise not that we will always get it right, but that we will stay in relationship when we get it wrong. We trust that truth keeps unfolding, that we keep unfolding, and that becoming is more faithful than pretending we have already become. So when I notice reactivity in myself now, and I do, I'm trying to meet it with curiosity instead of contempt. I'm trying to let the pause, when it comes, be spacious rather than shaming. I'm trying to remember that discernment is not something we either have or don't have. It is something we practice unevenly, imperfectly, again and again. And that is the invitation I carry for all of us as well. Not to stop reacting overnight, not to become careful to the point of silence, but to practice one small pause where we might once have rushed. To create a little more space between what we feel and what we say. To trust that even that small space can change something over time. As I think one last time of that horse, sitting so patiently with its foreleg resting in the woman's lap, I am struck by stillness, by the quiet willingness to remain long enough for careful work to be done. May we offer one another that same patience. May we allow ourselves to be works in progress without giving up on the work. And may the space between our reaction and our response become little by little one of the most life-giving places where we learn to dwell together.